Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. My name is Carey Nieuwhof, and my goal is to help you lead like never before. So what I do every week is I sit down with world-class leaders and church leaders, business leaders, and I talk to them about what made them who they are and try to have the conversation with them that you would have if you got to sit down for lunch with them or have dinner with them or really got to spend some time with them. So we go into the backstory and we explore what made them who they are and some of the principles they've learned along the way. So if you enjoy this episode, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, and also to share it with your friends. And in the meantime, here's today's episode. Well, Jeff and Beth, welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you here.
Yay, thanks for having us. We're so excited.
Yeah. So you guys have been digging into the Enneagram for a while. For those of you who are new, leaders who are new to the whole idea of Enneagram, we've had Ian Cron on a few times before. But can you give us an idea of why anybody in leadership should even care about the Enneagram? And true confession, you know this, I thought it was a fad before I really became a convert.
We wondered that as well.
And it kind of comes across, especially nowadays, as a fad, right? People are using it in all sorts of ways, and a lot of ways that I don't think are always helpful. But if you're a leader and you find that your coworkers aren't getting along, they don't understand each other, they keep getting stuck, you as a leader, you can't seem to figure out how to talk with your team in a way that encourages them or spurs them on, you kind of keep finding yourself stuck and you don't understand how to get out of it, then the Enneagram is going to be a super helpful tool because it gives you astonishing clarity into why people think, feel, and behave in particular ways. So the Enneagram is just a 9-pointed geometric figure. It looks like a 9-pointed star. And it's showing that there are 9 valid perspectives of seeing, interpreting, and reacting to the world. And so if you think of those 9 points on the star, each of them is one of the main personality types. Think of them as all different colors. And let's take those colors and put them as glasses. So all three of us, Carey, you, Jeff, and I all have glasses on right now. And it seems like we're all kind of seeing in the same way, right? Like they're just clear glasses. But in actuality, all three of us are different Enneagram types. And so it's like I'm wearing purple, you're wearing a deep red, and Jeff is wearing an orange color. Now, the Enneagram, those are just the colors our logo has. So it's not that each color has specific meaning. But what that means is that we are seeing, interpreting, and reacting to the world differently. Yet, we walk around this earth and in our businesses as if everyone should be seeing and doing and thinking the same way that we do. So we get agitated and frustrated, discouraged, irritable when people don't think and do what we think they should do, which is our way, right? The right way. So the Enneagram is going to bring that astonishing clarity. But where it's really powerful is if you think of it like an internal GPS. So Carey, for you, you're a type 8. I'm a 9. Jeff's a 6. Now, for each of us, when we each get into a car, our navigation system automatically knows where we're starting from. Well, to use the Enneagram, you need to know your main Enneagram type. And we'll get into that probably a little bit later. But you want to find the type that has your core motivations, your core fear, your core desire, core weakness, and core longing. Once you find that main type, that's your current location. But each of us have a place where we are trying to get at, which is the healthiest version of ourselves, which really is how God created us to be. So in the garden, when God created us, we would reflect him perfectly, but we're on the side of the fall. And so we sin, we fall short. And so that's like, let's say for me, let's say my perfect destination is going from where we live now in Nashville to Kansas City, where my parents are. We're just going to pretend. If I start from Nashville, but I start heading off to Chicago, that's not going to be helpful. I need to know where my current location is and where my healthiest destination. So for me as a 9, it's not about becoming an 8, a healthy 8. It's not about becoming a healthy 1 or all these other numbers. How has God called me to reflect him? Because we're the body of Christ. There is great diversity in all the 9 numbers, and that's a beautiful thing. So how has God called us to be unique? And then when we veer off course, we want to have that rumble strip on the side of the road. And that's part of the Enneagram where it alerts us now, oh, if I keep doing this, I'm going to fall into that same pitfall that I've always fallen into. How about I come back to the Holy Spirit, ask Him for help, and have Him work in and through me into that healthier direction? And so that's really what we're talking about with the Enneagram. So if you can realize as a leader, wow, there are times in my leadership that I have veered off course time and time again. I kept falling into that same pitfall. I didn't understand why, but the Enneagram is showing me exactly what's going on and why it's happening. But not only that, it's giving me a trajectory of a healthier destination for me to go. And then I can bless my team by living out that healthiest part of myself. That's really what we're trying to help leaders understand is it's not just about what you do, it's all about why you think, feel, and behave.
Yeah. So, for me, it's been a huge help in terms of self-awareness, understanding how I'm wired, what motivates me. And eights are, we're sort of, I don't know what you call it, the challenger. We're the people who don't like anyone to have power over us. So we're afraid of vulnerability. We don't want to be controlled. Jeff, how do you think, like for leaders listening, and we have a lot of leaders in the business sphere as well as the church sphere, but like knowing your team's Enneagram type, can that make you a better manager? Like, how does that help, Jeff, in just leading teams?
Yeah, absolutely. Beth and I found out about the Enneagram when I was in seminary in 2001. And so it's been a part of our pastoral career together for over 2 decades. What I found, and then in that time, I was also a mediator with Peacemaker Ministries when it was around. And one, it helps to get a way upstream from conflict. So there's much greater understanding of not only what's happening inside of them, but also what is happening inside of me. So Jesus' words in Luke 6, out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. James 4, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they wage war internally? And so by understanding what's happening inside of me, I'm able to extend the same kind of compassion and patience to those around me so that we're not just living reactively, but we can actually respond to one another in ways that are much more organized internally and much more compassionate for one another.
That's great. What would you say to people who think the Enneagram is overblown or just like not helpful?
Well, then they haven't dug in. I mean, if they've seen a lot of memes out there, unhelpful posts, and especially if they've experienced how people can weaponize it, oh, well, of course, they're not going to think it's very helpful. And we're very adamant that people not use the Enneagram as a sword or a shield. We don't want to hurt, belittle, tease, mock, bully anyone for how they've been created and their relational style, but we also don't want to use it as a shield, especially as a leader, as a type 9. Here I started your Enneagram coach. I could easily say, hey guys, sometimes 9s procrastinate. You're just going to have to deal with it, right? But no, that does not bring about growth. It doesn't bring about anything good in our company. Now, I can own it. I can say, guys, yeah, sometimes, I can procrastinate because I get anxious. Don't really know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I want. Could you help me? That's a weak spot for me. And so we want to make sure that we're just using the Enneagram correctly. But yeah, if someone hasn't dug in, or people call drink the Kool-Aid, it's really because they haven't experienced that astonishing clarity that the Enneagram can bring and accelerated growth that everyone experiences when they take it seriously.
Yeah. So,
and I think too, one of the things
ahead,
is
Jeff.
that the Enneagram came out of more of a spiritual tradition versus a Western, more well-studied and researched. And so what you're finding right now, particularly for us at your Enneagram coach, I mean, we reach millions of people globally. And so we're now having universities contacting us for research that not only has started, but research that's going to continue to come out here in the future that's going to put it right at the level of all the other great tools that are out there.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's really enjoyed a renaissance. It's been around for centuries. We've had Ian Cron do this, so I know there are some people who listen to every single episode, but I would love your really quick 10-second, 30-second take on each Enneagram type, just for people who are new or who can't remember. I could do it, but you'll do a way better job. So we'll start, there's 9 numbers. I'm an 8. We've already got a 6 and a 9. So Jeff, you're a 6, I heard. And
right.
Beth, you're a 9. Just start at 1 and maybe walk us through just the really hyper short elevator pitch for what each type is so that every listener can find themselves a little bit in the story.
Yeah. Yeah. So the type 1s are the principled reformers. They fear being inaccurate, wrong, bad, evil, corruptible. They're desiring to be good, virtuous, and right. The type 2s are the nurturing advisors, and they fear being unwanted, unloved, and unneeded. They're just wanting to be loved, accepted, and appreciated. The type 3s are the admirable achiever, and they fear being a failure, incompetent, worthless. What they desire is to have great worth, value, and be admired, and to have high status and a high image. Now, the type 4s are the introspective individualists, and they fear being emotionally cut off, mundane, original, plain. For them, they desire to be their most authentic self, to be special, to be unique. Now, type 5s are the individualist investigators. And for them, they fear being obligated to be incompetent and incapable, to not have knowledge, to be ignorant. For them, they desire to have all of the knowledge they need to press forward and to be able to dive deep into any given subject, but also to have enough internal resources to get that done. Now, the type 6 is the faithful guardian. They fear being without support, guidance, and security, to be blamed, targeted, and definitely abandoned. And what they desire is that security, guidance, and support. Now, the 7s are the enthusiastic optimist. And for them, they fear being they fear being trapped in emotional pain, limited, deprived, and definitely missing out on something fun. For them, they're looking to be happy, fully satisfied, and content. The type 8s, which is you, the passionate protectors, they fear being harmed, controlled, challenged, and definitely left at the mercy of injustice. For them, they're looking to be the protector of themselves and those in their tight inner circle. And the last but not least is my type, the peaceful accommodators. We fear any kind of conflict or tension. We fear being overlooked and unimportant. And we definitely are wanting inner stability and peace of mind. So that, in a nutshell, is all the 9 types with their core fears and their core desires.
And everyone has a strength and a weakness, right? There's some good parts of every type. And do you agree that there are healthy and unhealthy expressions of each type?
If anything about the Enneagram, I think that's one of the most important aspects of the Enneagram. And, we call it being aligned, misaligned, and out of alignment of truth. And when you're aligned with what is true, you're going to live that out. The overflow of your heart comes there. But then when we're starting to get misaligned, it's kind of autopilot. We're starting to react to life instead of being proactive and very aware. We're just reacting. And then being unhealthy or out of alignment, man, can be absolutely destructive for yourself and all your relationships. So we really want people to understand that no matter what type you are, there's no best type. All types at their healthiest are amazing. And all types at their worst are literally the worst.
Yeah.
So no one can take the prize and no one gets the worst. So, we just want people to recognize that's why the Enneagram is so helpful, because it really shows who you can become.
So we don't have to go through every type, but you can if you want. But I'd love you to random, again, people love to, again, this is free consulting, right? So people want to know, when am I unhealthy? When am I not unhealthy?
Yes.
What would be an example of like an unhealthy one? The person who has to make everything right, perfectionist tendencies, and then pick a few other types. You can pick on me, and maybe what an unhealthy 5 or 6 would be like.
Yeah,
I'm just pulling numbers out of a hat. So take it where you want.
Yeah. No, yeah. So the type 1s, for them, when they're struggling, they're definitely going to be hypercritical. They're going to see all the flaws, And it's because they have an inner critic that sees all the imperfections of life and in people and in themselves. And it's like a megaphone at the type one's ear. That inner critic is constantly berating them and getting them to either fix it themselves or get someone else to fix it. And it's relentless.
So is this the dilemma? You go to the desk at work of a type one, everything's perfectly organized. You open up their stationery drawer, the pencils are sharpened, they're all lined up. And you think this person has it all together. Like they should come to my house and organize everything. But inside there's this like super harsh critic.
Oh, it's relentless. And I think that's why the Enneagram can be so powerful, because when you can see past any facade, because we can all put a facade on, if you look past that, you're going to see brokenness and you're going to see why they do what they do. So for the type ones, that critic, the inner critic is relentless. I constantly say it's berating them. And it is trying to make them perfect and others perfect and the world perfect. And as we all know, we're on this side of the fall and it's just not going to happen. And so it's exhausting. And so when anyone brings criticism to the type one, what they have to realize is they already had 100 or 1,000-fold of criticisms aimed at them from their inner critic already. So if you feel that they're too sensitive or prickly or kind of bite back, it's because they've already dealt with all of that. And usually it's kind of like a coffee cup when you pour coffee in it, and it starts to spill over. Well, that's kind of what's happening with a type one. When you start to feel criticism coming outside of the type one, it's because they've already dealt so much with criticism aimed at them from the inner critic that it's overflowing into how they're reacting to those around them. And so to understand that, it can give you empathy.
What does an unhealthy or misaligned one do? How do they act out at work? How would you feel the impact of a misaligned, unhealthy
Yeah, well, what's
one?
interesting is that though they're going to feel great resentment inside, and the resentment comes where they feel they're the only adult in the room. Like no one else is doesn't everyone else see these imperfections? Because we all think we see the world the same way. So ones think everyone else sees these imperfections and they're choosing not to take care of it. So it brings up resentment. But to be resentful or angry in the mind of a one means that's being bad and wrong, which is one of their core fears. So they come at it from a different place than just being angry. Like a type 8 might just say it like it is, right. Hey, let's get at this, Whereas a type 1 is going to bring it with more logic and reason and not so much of a bite, except you're going to feel it kind of come out sideways. You're going to feel a little bit of prickliness. You're going to feel
passive-aggressive a bit?
It's a little bit of passive-aggressive, but it's a slight coldness, but they're trying to be warm. You can feel the criticism underneath. Or they will say what needs to be done or tell you where things are wrong, but they're going to try to do it in a warm way, but you can just feel that bite under the surface. And that's usually when they're struggling, when it's really built up inside them. And that's where we can come alongside our type ones and kind of help to advocate for them by letting them know you've done a great job seeing what needs to be perfected. And I really appreciate your detailed eye on things. And it seems like right now you might be really under the gun or feeling the pressure to get things right or to make things perfect. Is that true? And so by coming alongside them can really mean the world to them.
That's super helpful. So let's dive in, Jeff or Beth, on another type and pick it apart that way. Because now I think it's coming into
HD
for leaders.
Sure. We can. You can comment on the Enneagram stuff and I'll elaborate.
Tell everyone about the sixes.
Well, at our best, we're loyal. And our loyal trumps everything else. As a matter of fact, how we use all of our gifts, all of our knowledge, it's all in trying to find security in relationship with someone else or even a system of belief. And so it's not so much about, it's very selfish in the sense that I want security, but it's also about other people. So it can look at times very accommodating to other people. It can look very people-pleasing. Now, sixes are a little bit more dynamic than some other types because there's two types of sixes. And there's one six that's very phobic, fearful. And there's another 6 that's more reactive, and they call that counterphobic. And they actually look like 8s at times.
Mm-hmm. Well, they all have fear.
But they all have fear, and everything is negotiating around that fear. So when it comes to organizations and contributions to the team, 6s oftentimes will overperform, trying to find security, will you prove your loyalty to me as much as I'm proving to you? Mm-hmm. The biggest message that you can give to 6s whenever you start to see anxious behaviors, passive aggressiveness, it's almost at times they can be very enmeshed, and then we can also be very distant and independent. And you never quite know where a type 6 can be, and it can feel a little chaotic. But the biggest thing that you can give to a 6 as a leader is engagement. And to stand with them in the midst of their storm and saying, hey, I'm here. We're good. Mm-hmm. You're good. You're doing a great job. And what you'll find is that the more that you're able to, what we call a non-anxious presence, to offer a non-anxious presence to a type 6, the more their interior. So if a 1 has a critic, a 6 has an inner committee. Yep. They've got a ton of voices that includes a critic that they're trying to answer to make sure that they're the best that they can be for their leaders and their teams.
So I don't know that I have this right, and a little knowledge is dangerous, and that's what I have about the Enneagram, although I have done some research. Is it true that the Enneagram 6 because I'm convinced from what I know, that everyone who answers to a board, which is most church leaders and a lot of business leaders, they have a 6 on the board. And as I learned about the Enneagram, I thought, I think I have mistaken what the 6s bring, because are they the people, and I could be wrong here, who will often raise questions about the 15% budget hike because, boy, that's ambitious. How do you know we're going to make it? And they will have a lot of questions up front, but be deeply loyal on the back end. Is that typical behavior for a 6?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes from that heart of protecting. So the loyal guardian protecting their team. That could be their church, their family, school, whatever team that is. They're definitely, and they're able to think through all the possibilities. That's the thing. That's where the inner committee comes in. The inner committee, Jeff has said, it's kind of like being in Parliament in England, where, you got the main speaker who's speaking. And then all of a sudden, like, hey, we're going to be doing this, folks. And then all of a sudden, everyone else is booing or hissing or cheering or giving all their viewpoints all at the same time. And that's what it feels like inside a 6. So a 6 in a meeting like that can think through all of the possibilities. Now, for those that have already made the decisions, we're going to have a budget, we're going to move forward in this area, and all of a sudden here comes someone and they're asking all these questions, it can feel like they're not for the group or they're for the board, when in actuality, they're trying to prevent anything negative from happening. And so to come alongside them and say, wow, I can really see that you're, being loyal and faithful and thinking through all the things. We really appreciate that. Do you think maybe next time we could set up a time where you could, we could write up all those questions and answer them ahead of time, Now, we're not that, they'll still have questions when they get there. There'll be even more questions, but to help bring a sense of, hey, we're for you too. And we want to help you to navigate all of the questions that you have that are good and helpful. But maybe 30 questions in one board meeting won't be as helpful.
Well, and there's a few people will experience what I call our coaching director calls my 6-iness. So when people are experiencing my 6-iness, they can experience it in 2 ways. One, it can come across as suspiciousness of a leader, that I don't think you're taking good care of the team or the organization. Or number 2, it's because I'm fiercely loyal and I don't want there to be a mistake that's going to harm the team or the organization.
Right.
So my engagement sometimes can bring an energy of suspiciousness, or it can bring an energy of loyalty.
See, I am convinced you confirmed something. When I look back on my first decade in leadership, I think I had some 6s on the board who were actually very deeply loyal, which makes sense because when I inherited the churches I was leading at the time, it's often the most loyal people who are the last people left. It's like, it's not going down on my watch, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
I would interpret their questions as disloyalty. And I
Right.
wish I could go back and see that, because eventually I weaned people like that off the board, not in a bad way, but as an 8, I saw that as a
Yes.
challenge. And really what
Well,
they were
and that's
trying
one
to
of the
do.
fears of an 8 is
Yeah.
betrayal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so if a 6 is seeing that maybe as an 8 leader, you're not fully recognizing some of the all the consequences of your decisions, then there's going to be a fight. And that's one of the things that earlier on that you mentioned about why the Enneagram is important, because it gives a language to understanding that dynamic and to be able to have a vocabulary to name it in the moment.
And what's interesting is that 8s definitely work off of a kind of a hierarchy. I am the leader, I'm the boss. And it's not because, obviously, if an 8's unhealthy, it's different. It's not because, I have to be seen as the leader. It's, I've got your back. And I talked about this when you did our podcast. 8s, I call them diesel snowplows, the big snowplows that you experience up in Toronto, because at their very best, they're making sure everyone is behind them and they're plowing a path so that everyone can get on that highway and get where they need to go. And they're the ones to take on the opposition and the hits and the strain that it takes to get the snow off the road or obstacles. But for an 8, they can feel like, hey, everyone get behind me. Whereas a 6, what's interesting is they don't like hierarchy. They want everyone to be seen as, kind of on the same playing field. And so when someone comes in with too much leadership and kind of telling people what to do, the 6 can get very provocative and start pushing and prodding to see, okay, well, that's okay, but are you for us or are you just trying to tell us what to do? And so it can get very provocative and testing loyalties and seeing where everything is going to land. And so, but then that can really upset the 8 because it's like, why are you challenging me? And that's why this is so powerful, like you said, Jeff, is if we understand what's going on under the hood, we can actually have real conversations about what's going on versus assuming, and we call it assumicide, assuming incorrectly other people's thoughts, feelings, and motives, which gets us in a whole heap of trouble.
Okay, well, this is really good stuff because, I need the first 5 years of my leadership back with a couple of key relationships based on this. I just didn't know, and they didn't know.
Sure.
And when you're not aware of that, you end up in a really, and it wasn't terrible. It wasn't like headline stuff. It's just like you end up hurting each other when you don't mean to, which is so good. And, I can think of some 6s in my life, and every time it's like, well, this could go wrong and that could go wrong and this could go wrong and that could go wrong. And I'm like, just do it, but when you realize that that's different wiring, it's super helpful. Okay, let's pick on another type. Let's do 3s and 7s because my theory, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is many of the leaders, not all, but a lot of the leaders I work with are 3s, 7s, 8s, 2s, and 1s. Those are the most dominant types that show up in my field. Not that there aren't 9s, 6s, and 5s and 4s, but they tend to show up. So let's pick on 3s. What do you call them again? I think of them as performers. These are the
admirable achievers.
They're achievers. Yep, they're achievers.
They are achievers. And man, they can be optimistic, hardworking. They can champion people. They're the types of people that have lists and goals, and they are going to get those things done. But they can get really frustrated if others aren't as efficient as they are, and if others' work kind of puts them in a bad light. So if they aren't as successful or it reflects poorly on them, that can get 3s really frustrated and upset.
A lot of it is image related, right? A little bit
very
image
much
related.
Yeah.
I need to be seen as successful.
Exactly. Yes. So we talk about Jeff was a place kicker in college, and the saying, you're as good as your last kick. Well, for a 3, it's you're as good as your last success. And so they're always striving for this next success, this next achievement. But once they check it off, they're like, yes, I did it. Gold star, trophy, whatever you want to call it. For them, it's like 5 seconds of glory. And then it's like, oh, but wait, what's the next thing? And they have to go on to that next thing and the next thing. And it's exhausting to always hold up a very specific image that they want to show others that are around them. And so for them, they're constantly not realizing how exhausted they are because they're always running to the next thing.
And the good news about threes, because at times it's almost as if they don't see you, because they're so focused on the goal and getting to the goal that people become instruments to get them to where they want to be. But when a three moves to health and starts to understand their own interior world, and that they're the false self that they're portraying to everybody else as the achiever that everybody should admire, when they start to identify who they really are as people, then they start to see people on their teams and in their organizations to move towards them, so that it's not just them at their best at the expense of others, but they're at their best as they're bringing everybody else along with them.
Exactly.
And if you're leading a three, what are some keys to leading a three well?
Well, you had actually said it in our last podcast, and I was like, yes, that's absolutely correct. You definitely want to cheer them on. They really thrive well on affirmation and recognition. But really what they're hoping for is to be cared for, to be delighted in for who they really are. Now, they're constantly putting on these achieving masks and personas. But if you can kind of just get between all of that and say, hey, I see you, I really admire you and I like you, it's really going to blow them away. And that can really help them to feel like, oh, you mean I don't have to achieve all the time? Like you like me just for me? And that is gold right there. And what you're going to see is they're going to start to realize that they can start to come alongside everyone else and to be a champion on everyone's behalf versus just their own image. And that could be really dynamic.
Super helpful. Can we talk about sevens?
Yes, sevens.
Sevens are enthusiastic, fun-loving.
Yes. We call them
masters of pain.
Enthusiastic optimist. Man, they're just excitable. They love great challenges in their careers. They're innovative. They're some of the most creative on the Enneagram. There's no failure. Whereas for threes, it's all the fear of failure. For sevens, it's like, failure? What are you talking about? This is a new opportunity.
I fell out of the airplane with no chute, but I walked away. So it's fine, right? It was fun.
It's all good, right? But for them, where they can slip into, trouble, especially being a leader, is that they can lose focus. They can get really excited about a project or a new shiny thing, but then they can lose focus because then they're off to the next shiny thing and then the next shiny thing. And so, and they can really procrastinate with mundane tasks, which can be a real hardship for a leader, right? Because we all have things that we have to get done. Even if we have assistants that kind of help us along the way, there's still things that we have to do. And if they procrastinate or actually avoid them altogether, that can basically be a snowball effect where it just keeps going down the hill. And eventually it could wipe out the whole team if it's not taken care of.
So you could almost be the leader, because you hear about this all the time, who read a new book, went to a new conference, and all of a sudden the whole company is going to pivot. And we're doing this. And the whole team knows for 30 days until you read the next book or listen to the next podcast or go to the next event or have a new friend who told you this is the way. Is it that kind of personality that can show up at work as well?
My initial thought is yes. And each Enneagram type would have their what reasons for doing that. So a 6 might adhere to the book because they believe it to be true and it's going to answer all of their worst case scenarios. The 5 may be like, oh, this is well reasoned, and based upon all of my research, this is the best of the many voices on this particular subject. But it is true, yes, 7s will do it because they may jump in immediately to the excitement of a new idea and a new way to to whether expand the business, scale the business, reach more people, impact more people's lives. But then once they see the next one, or they see the limitations in this one idea, that they're looking for the next one to solve it because they don't want to be constrained by just one idea.
Yeah, or limited or deprived of fun. Yeah, and for them, once it's kind of like Christmas Day for kids. We love the anticipation of Christmas Day. But then we get to Christmas Day and we open the presents in 5 seconds, and then it's like, really? That's it? And we're kind of let down because we built this huge thing in our mind. That's really what it's like for 7s on a daily basis. They're constantly thinking of the next fun thing. It could be the next thing they eat, the next conversation they have. But for a leader, if it's that next book they read and that next project, Well, once they get closer to the project and they start to see all the details that have to be done, the mundane tasks, the things that aren't fun, that's when they start to get a little antsy and they want to leap off into the next thing. And so they just have to recognize that this is something that they have to recognize and deal with, and how they can grow. They can totally grow in being present in the moment, seeing all the possibilities around them, and navigating some of those weaknesses so that they can continue on the path of that goal or that project and to get it actually done.
So you're giving them some guidelines to stay focused, to stay on mission, to stay on strategy, to say, let's not pivot every 20 minutes here. It's true, or is it true, that sevens struggle with pain? In other words, I keep going from adrenaline hit to adrenaline hit to avoid looking at the really big issues in life. How do you counsel that when you're leading a seven? How do you, or do you just avoid it? Do you go with a 4, it's like, oh, they're leading with their heart.
Well, if you're a type 9,
but a 7,
you avoid it.
What's that?
If you're type 9, you might avoid it.
Well, yeah, there's a great line. The author Dan Allender once said that if you can't get out of it, get into it. And the idea with the 7, I'm mindful. One of the type 7s that comes to mind is from the movie Patch Adams. It was when he was a doctor, and he would go onto the children's floor to bring joy to some of the kids that were suffering the most. The key here is that for a 7, when they hear no, they're thinking of that childlike part of their heart that's telling them they can't do something, versus drawing something out of them that is very noble and admirable, because 7s can bring joy and life to even some of the most sorrowful situations. And so it's appealing to their giftedness to bring life and ideas, but to use it as a superpower versus using it frenetically and without control or without restraint.
Yeah, so if 7s are able to sit in the mundane all the way to pain, so there's a lot of in between there, they are remarkable at bringing life and abundance and joy to some of those dark recesses. Another great movie is Inside Out. Joy on Inside Out. She's trying so hard to get rid of sadness, basically, like just to shove her out somehow. Here, you stay in this circle, don't move. But at the end, what she recognizes, it is the embrace of the joy all the way to the sorrow of life that makes it so rich and beautiful. And so that's when she realized, okay, we can have both and it actually be meaningful instead of trying to get rid of sadness. And so that's really, what we see when we see 7s embrace the fullness of life. That's where they really excel.
This is so helpful because, when you start out in leadership, or at least my journey, it's like you don't think any of these factors are in play. And then the longer you're at it, you're like, no, we're leading humans. And this is all in play at work.
Yeah. Well,
and we all have responses to each of these types. I mean, my response to a 7 or to a type 1 is very different than my wife's response to those. So even for you as a leader, it helps to give vocabulary and compassion to yourself and understanding all these dynamics that are happening around you that maybe you weren't able to access before.
Yeah, I mean, just the knowledge of the Enneagram has really helped us lead our company. And for me as a 9, I'm a peaceful accommodator. And if I were to just live in that position of just accommodation, that is not a good leader, right? There are things that have to get done. And the 9s, what we struggle with the most is what's called sloth. And it's not a physical laziness. And in fact, 9s can actually be the busiest on the Enneagram. And a lot of it's to avoid all the other things, but we're busy on the behalf of others. But we forget about ourselves. There's this internal fog. But I can't lead well unless I know myself and I lead from that interior part of the core of who I am and what I want. And really what I want as a leader, I want my team to feel cared for, like almost like Camelot, where there's a round table, like everyone has a place at the table. I want your voice to matter. I want my voice to matter. I want your voice to matter. I want you to be seen and heard. I want you to excel where God has created you. That is a really beautiful thing. But if I don't adhere to it and stay strong in that, and I just start to accommodate when people are kind of, let's say, upset, or they want this or they want that, it can really topple the whole system. But to know what I need and to go after it is so important. So using the Enneagram has been so helpful for me to be able to speak specifically and with directness to any of the personality types, the way they need to be talked to, not the way I want for people to talk to me.
Apparently 9s make great presidents as well. I wonder if Lincoln was a 9.
Yep.
You know?
We think Lincoln, Reagan, Obama, probably Clinton, at least those, and maybe Carter. There's several presidents that were 9s. Like President Reagan, I would definitely believe he was a 9 with an 8 wing, which is actually me. Though we use both our wings, I definitely lean more into that 8 space, which is great because it helps me to get going, to advocate, and to have passion where my 9 wants to chill out, but you can see that passion in Reagan.
No, that's good because it's both sides of the aisle, and that's what they have to do. The best presidents are bringing people together with wildly different opinions. If you watch the movie Team of Rivals or read Doris Kearns Goodwin's book on Lincoln, he has that uncanny ability to reach into all kinds of factions, people who would never be in the same room, who come in the same room and achieve something nobody thought was possible. Okay, we're coming up on time, but let's talk about 8s. My poison. This is my unique form of things. So what are the problems in working with 8s? And Andy Stanley and I had this conversation in a previous episode. We'll link to it in the show notes, but he has a number of 8s on his team. And he's a 1. So he tends to work too hard on stuff and be a perfectionist and want to get it just right. And he said the 8s were really weird because it takes him a while to figure out what he thinks. And the 8s have an instant opinion. They can charge hard. They can be loud. They can be dominating and intimidating. How do you lead 8s?
Yeah.
It's great. One of the interesting things about the Enneagram, Beth and I noticed that so when we started your Enneagram coach, the people who we hired first were typically 8s.
Wow.
Because as first-time entrepreneurs, and Beth being a 9, me being a 6, where we're not leading with a very bold vision, and we needed people to help us make decisions, which is interesting because we were actually addressing a blind spot, and it took us about a year. Like, wow, we've hired a team of 8s.
How did you not let that intimidate you or have them take over to the point where you're both on the unemployment
we
line?
know their heart. That's why the Enneagram is so beautiful.
That's right. So we were hiring 8s whose hearts were in the right place.
Yeah.
So they weren't coming in saying, we're going to take over your business and make you a 7-figure business. They were saying, Beth, at the time, we're going to help you to amplify your voice.
Yeah, your vision.
They were using their 8ness on behalf of others, not for themselves.
And so when I understood, so with 8s, where they can get stuck is by being too direct, too direct, blunt, my way or the highway. I'm going to challenge you before you can challenge me. Just real intense and have a sense of intimidation, even though they don't realize it.
I mean, Beth, I remember you calling it confrontational intimacy.
Yep.
Not intimacy.
Oh, it's true. If you're not fighting with me, you don't love me.
Yeah.
Well,
and I'm not a fighter. Like, I'm not that guy online, but like, if you're going to back off, it's a what's the word I'm looking for? Indifference drives me crazy.
Yes.
Or
there's a movie
holding
in the Matrix
back.
movies that said that one guy was fighting Neo, and at the end he said, "You never know a man until you fought him." And there's a sense to where that's what it was like for 8s. Like, show me that you're going to match my energy, and that I can trust you, and that you're going to engage in this mission to the same degree that I am.
Because my wife finds that exhausting.
Yes, I was going to say, as a 9, it goes against my entire core of my being. But here's what's amazing is with the team that we brought on, and to see behind, so the 8s have this strong exterior, but in fact, they are some of the most tender on the Enneagram. And I've had several 8s in my life that showed vulnerability of that side of them. Which is very rare, but when you see it, you're amazed at the depth of tenderness and what they will do to protect those that they love. Once I got to see that, and I knew 8s at the core, I was able to bring these people on the team because what they were saying is, Beth, we believe in your vision and what God is doing in and through you, and we're going to make sure that you don't slip into sloth again. We're going to make sure that we champion you and what God is doing in and through you. And I knew that their heart was always going to be for me and to protect me, not to blindside me, because that's their greatest fear. And that's something that they're not going to do.
And they still get out ahead of us at times.
Well, sure, they're 8s. I mean,
but
yeah.
I know that they're attuned to me as a leader.
Yeah.
They're not just out there on their own.
Yeah. So sometimes they'll, I think maybe you even said it earlier, that 8s, they think that they can get so much done quickly, and in actuality, their team can't hold that much. And I was like, oh my gosh,
I think I said that on your
exactly.
podcast.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me, by the way.
Yeah, that's what we are experiencing right now. Like, we have these big projects coming up, and our COO, who's an 8, she's like, yeah, we can totally get this done. And Jeff and I are looking at each other going, we know we've done this before, and it's going to take a lot more time than this short amount of time. And she's totally willing to listen and to pivot, but in her mind, she can definitely make it seem like, oh, it's totally doable, because as an 8, it is. It's confidence and assertiveness. But the coolest thing is when an 8 knows that you have their back and that you support them and that you're going to protect them just as much, they'll listen to your leadership and they'll follow suit. And so it's just been great having them on our team, because I know their loyalty is just it's out of the park, right?
Right. Okay. Well, I got to ask, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a fascinating conversation that I think has helped a lot of leaders. But you have some great resources. You have a book, Becoming Us, that you co-wrote together. You've also got 45 courses on all the different types, combinations of Enneagram. And you got a podcast. Tell us where they can find all things that you do, the McCords.
Yeah, if you go to yourenneagramcoach.com, that's the main page where all the resources are listed. But if you're new to the Enneagram, we just launched this year a great free introductory video series that help you to find your type and understand all the 9 types. And it's called enneawhat.com.
Because everyone goes, Ennea what? Like, what is this?
Brilliant.
So enneawhat.com.
We will link to that in the show notes. I really appreciate you both. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, and
thanks, Carey.
Really, really helpful in even leading my own team. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, Carey.
Well, I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can always get more by subscribing to my channel. I also have a lot more content over at CareyNieuwhof.com for leaders in business and leaders in churches. And you can get transcripts of this episode there and so much more, plus some other stuff I do for leaders. So head on over there to discover more at CareyNieuwhof.com. And in the meantime, I really hope our time together today has helped you lead like never before.